70 miles per hour. That's how fast cops say a 17-year-old was driving when he mowed down two teen girls riding on an e-bike. Now video has surfaced of the suspect shortly after the crash, laughing on a gaming site.
Behind the wheel of a Jeep, racing at 70 miles per hour. That's the speed police say Vincent Battle was driving when tragedy struck. Two teenage best friends, Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas, were out riding together on an e-bike. In an instant their lives were cut short. But what followed was even more disturbing. Not long after the crash, video surfaced online. A teenager, accused of murder, laughing into his microphone while gaming. The same laugh investigators now link to a boy facing the most serious charge the law can bring. This wasn't just an accident on a quiet street. Court records tell a story of obsession, rejection, and months of calculated behavior that built up to one violent night. Police documents reveal that Battle had been fixated on Maria. She had already distanced herself, even filing for a restraining order after unwanted advances. Yet he kept pushing boundaries. He ordered pizzas to her home as a cruel prank, then mocked her online. In one chilling clip, he can be heard joking about it with friends, even recounting how Maria's mother once spotted his car near their house. What could have been dismissed as teenage immaturity now looks like foreshadowing for something much darker. 9 days before the deadly crash, he filmed himself calling in another prank order. 2 pepperoni pizzas delivered to Maria's home. The stunt ended with a laugh, unnerving, unsettling, and unforgettable. To some viewers it was just a game. To police, it is now a piece of evidence in a chain of events pointing toward intent. When the crash happened, reports say he fled the scene. Officers tracked him down quickly, citing him for multiple violations, 15 in total, but astonishingly he wasn't immediately arrested. He told police it was an accident. And for a brief moment, it seemed like he might walk away from it all. But the very next day something unexpected happened. Online in a neighboring town's forum, he posted condolences. A polished message, almost detached, offering sympathy to the very community shattered by the deaths of Maria and Isabella. Some saw it as remorse. Investigators saw it as cover. By Wednesday, detectives pieced together his link to Maria, his online comments, and his gaming videos. That's when everything changed. Vincent Battle was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The families of Maria and Isabella were left devastated. In their grief, Maria's mother called her daughter her sunshine. Not just a child, but her closest companion. Both families united in their pain, releasing a joint statement calling the suspect a coward, accusing him of plotting this attack for months. And so begins a story not just about a crash, but about obsession, ignored warning signs, and the devastating cost of violence at the hands of someone no one expected. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. Maria Tiz and her best friend, Isabella Salas, were riding side by side on their e-bike. 17 years old, carefree, bonded like sisters, their friendship was something people admired. But what began as a simple ride quickly turned into tragedy. At around 70 miles per hour, a Jeep came tearing down the road. Investigators say Vincent Battle was behind the wheel. Witnesses described the sound as deafening, metal against metal, rubber screeching, and then silence. The impact was so violent, there was no chance for the girls to escape. In the moments after, neighbors rushed outside. Panic set in. Some screamed, others dialed 911, but the driver who caused the wreck had already disappeared. Reports say Battle fled, leaving behind destruction, confusion, and 2 families about to face their worst nightmare. When police caught up with him that night, what happened next stunned many. Despite the chaos he left behind, despite the lives taken, officers issued citations, 15 of them in total. Speeding, reckless driving, fleeing the scene. Yet, Vincent Battle walked away without an arrest. He told investigators it was all an accident. For a brief time his story stood. The system treated him as a reckless teenager, not as a murderer. But there was something more, something the officers didn't yet know. Behind the crash there was motive, history, and a disturbing pattern of behavior that pointed toward something far more deliberate. That night, while families mourned and communities whispered in disbelief, Battle returned to his online world. To his gaming circles. To the same space where he had laughed, joked, and plotted pranks aimed at Maria. The crash hadn't silenced him. In fact, he had more to say. The next day he posted condolences. Words that, on the surface, looked compassionate. He wrote as though he were just another bystander, another local shaken by the news. But the truth, waiting to be uncovered, was that the person expressing sympathy was the very one responsible for the loss. What investigators would find next would shatter any illusion of innocence. And it would turn what seemed like an accident into what prosecutors now call a cold, calculated act. Long before the crash, before the headlines, before police pieced everything together, there were warning signs. They didn't appear in classrooms or on neighborhood streets. They showed up online. 17-year-old Vincent Battle wasn't just another gamer passing the time. His voice, captured in clips now uncovered by investigators, carried a different weight. In one recording he is heard placing a fake pizza order. Harmless to some, maybe even childish. But the delivery address wasn't random. It was Maria's house. Maria had already made it clear, she wanted no contact with him. She had rejected his advances and even filed for a restraining order, hoping to create distance and protect herself. But Vincent wasn't ready to let go. Instead of moving on, he turned her rejection into a fixation. During one of his gaming streams, his friends heard him chuckle after confirming the prank order. 2 pepperoni pizzas, he said, as if it were a joke only he understood. Then came a laugh, unnatural, sharp, unforgettable. The kind of laugh that, in hindsight, sounds less like amusement and more like a warning. To his online circle it was banter. But to Maria and her family, it was harassment. She had already noticed him watching her house, and according to Vincent himself, Maria's mother once spotted him parked outside. Police were called. He admitted it online casually, even bragging about how he had been tracked and confronted. 9 days before the crash, he repeated the prank. Another pizza order, another cruel laugh. This time he added a twist, mocking Maria for making fun of a political figure. He told viewers that now, whenever she saw a delivery driver, she'd be reminded of her own joke. The bitterness in his tone revealed something deeper than humor. It was personal. It was calculated. Every clip painted a clearer picture of someone who wasn't just lashing out in the moment. He was plotting, testing boundaries, building toward something larger. And when the crash finally happened, police began to connect the dots. The videos weren't harmless pranks. They were breadcrumbs, evidence of obsession, of resentment, of intent. For investigators, one question grew louder with every discovery. Was this crash really just an accident, or the final act in a plan that had been unfolding for months? After the crash, shock rippled through the community. 2 lives lost in an instant, 2 families shattered forever. Friends gathered, neighbors lit candles, and the town struggled to understand how something so violent could happen on what should have been a simple ride home. But while grief spread, Vincent Battle took a different step. Instead of silence, instead of hiding, he went online. On a forum connected to a neighboring town, he posted words that sounded thoughtful, even sorrowful. He wrote that he sent his sincerest condolences to the victims of a hit-and-run crash. He painted himself as a bystander, as if he were just another person mourning the loss. For many, the message might have passed as ordinary. But for investigators, once they uncovered it, the timing was chilling. The boy offering sympathy was the very same driver accused of ending those girls' lives. It wasn't compassion. It was a mask. A way to mislead, to cover his tracks, to redirect suspicion. Behind the scenes, detectives were already at work. They weren't just looking at crash reports. They were digging into Vincent's past, his connections, his online history. The pizza prank videos surfaced. The laugh. The mocking comments aimed at Maria. The restraining order. Each piece connected him closer to the girls, especially to Maria, who had made it clear she didn't want him near her. By Wednesday, the picture was undeniable. This wasn't random. It wasn't just reckless driving. It was personal. It was targeted. And it ended in tragedy. That night, police made their move. Vincent Battle, just 17 years old, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The boy who once laughed into a headset was now facing the most serious accusation a teenager could ever stand against. For the families of Maria and Isabella, the arrest brought little comfort. Their daughters were gone, their lives stolen. Maria's mother stood before cameras and called her child her sunshine, not only a daughter but a best friend. Isabella's family shared in the grief, their voices breaking as they joined Maria's loved ones in condemning the accused. In a joint statement, both families labeled him a coward. They said this wasn't sudden rage or a simple mistake, it was a plan. A plan built over months. And now it was clear, the crash was never just a crash. The mask had slipped. The sympathy post, the gaming videos, the laughter, everything was evidence. And prosecutors now had the story of a teenager whose obsession had spiraled into violence, leaving behind 2 broken families and a town searching for answers. The arrest made headlines, but for the families of Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas, no headline could measure the depth of their loss. Two teenage girls, full of life, laughter, and plans for the future, were gone. Maria's mother spoke first, her voice shaking as she described her daughter not just as her child, but as her sunshine. She called her a best friend, a partner in every moment of her life. To her, Maria was more than a daughter, she was her reason for joy. Isabella's family echoed that grief. They described a young girl who was caring, spirited, and deeply loved. Her absence left a silence that no words could fill. For both families, the pain was shared, and together they chose to face the storm head-on. In a joint statement, they made their feelings clear. They called Vincent Battle a coward. They said he had plotted the attack, targeting Maria and dragging Isabella into his anger. To them, this was no accident, no mistake. It was a calculated choice that ended in murder. As their voices spread, the community began to rally. Vigils were held. Friends carried photos of the two girls, candles lit beneath the night sky. Strangers who had never met Maria or Isabella came to pay respects. Across town, people whispered about the tragedy, about how something so terrible could happen at the hands of someone so young. Meanwhile, investigators were building their case. The crash was only one part of the story. The online clips, the laughter, the prank calls, the restraining order, all of it painted a picture of intent. Prosecutors now had to prove it. They began to piece together a timeline, connecting each event to the next, showing a pattern that stretched back months. Vincent's words, once shrugged off as teenage antics, became key evidence. His laughter, his taunts, his posts, they were no longer just fragments of online chatter. They became the foundation of a murder case. For the families, justice meant more than punishment. It meant truth. It meant making sure the world knew that Maria and Isabella weren't victims of an accident, but of a deliberate act. Every court filing, every update, was another step toward that truth. But as the case gained momentum, new questions began to surface. Questions about what could have been done sooner. About why warnings weren't enough. About how a teenager's obsession was allowed to grow until it cost two innocent lives. The answers weren't clear yet. But one thing was certain, the fight for justice was only beginning. In today's world, footprints aren't just left on streets, they're left online. Every message, every post, every video leaves a trace. And when investigators turned their attention to Vincent Battle's digital life, what they uncovered was a roadmap leading directly to his intent. The crash had already shaken the community, but the evidence hidden in his online behavior revealed something far more chilling. The prank calls, the laughter, the pizza deliveries, those were only the beginning. Detectives combed through chat logs and gaming clips. In one, Vincent casually mentioned pulling up to Maria's house, laughing about how her mother spotted his car and reported him. He described police tracking him down, brushing it off as though it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. To him, it was a story to entertain his gaming friends. To investigators, it was proof of stalking behavior. Another video showed him mocking Maria directly, twisting her words into jokes, and using her rejection as fuel for his anger. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. This wasn't random teasing. This was targeted harassment repeated over and over. As they pieced together his online presence, prosecutors found a disturbing pattern. Vincent wasn't hiding his actions, he was documenting them, broadcasting them, leaving behind a trail of evidence that, when placed side by side, revealed motive, resentment, and intent. One clip in particular stood out. 9 days before the fatal crash, he laughed into his microphone as he ordered pizzas to Maria's home. He joked that she'd forever connect the delivery driver with a political figure she had mocked online. To some, his tone might have seemed playful. But investigators noted the underlying obsession. This wasn't about pizza. It was about control, about humiliating someone who had rejected him. When prosecutors presented these findings, they argued that the crash was not a tragic mistake. It was the final act of a pattern. A chain of escalating behavior, ignored warnings, and digital confessions hidden in plain sight. For the families, learning about the digital trail was like reliving the nightmare. Every video, every laugh, every word was a reminder of the obsession that had stolen their daughters. But it also gave them something they desperately needed: proof. Proof that Maria and Isabella's deaths were not chance. Proof that justice was possible. And with each revelation, the case against Vincent Battle grew stronger. But so did the questions surrounding it. How had these signs gone unnoticed for so long? How had a teenager been able to broadcast his intentions without anyone stepping in before it was too late? The answers were still unfolding. But one thing was certain. His own digital world had become the prosecution's most powerful weapon. As investigators stacked evidence and prosecutors connected the dots, one reality became unavoidable. This case was headed for trial. And it wouldn't be a quiet one. The courtroom became the next battleground. On one side, the families of Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas, grieving, united, determined to see justice. On the other, the defense of a teenager accused of turning obsession into murder. For prosecutors, the challenge was clear. They had to prove intent. Prove that Vincent Battle's actions weren't reckless mistakes, but deliberate choices. Every prank video, every online laugh, every fake pizza order became more than just teenage mischief. They became puzzle pieces that prosecutors fit together into a single narrative. Months of plotting, escalating harassment, and a crash that was no accident. Behind the scenes, attorneys prepared to show jurors the disturbing recordings. To let them hear his voice, his laugh, his mocking words. To lay bare the chilling reality that the same teenager expressing condolences online had, in fact, engineered the tragedy. The families braced themselves. Sitting in court meant hearing details no parent should ever have to hear. It meant reliving the night of the crash, listening to testimony about how their daughters spent their final moments. But it also meant standing for truth. Their presence alone would be a reminder to jurors that this case was about more than evidence. It was about lives stolen, futures erased. The community watched closely. News cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters asked questions no one was ready to answer, and neighbors who once saw Vincent as just another teenager now struggled to process what he had become. For some, it was unthinkable that someone so young could face charges of first-degree murder. For others, the evidence made the truth undeniable. Inside the courthouse, tension mounted. Prosecutors spoke of patterns and motives. The defense prepared to argue that it was nothing more than a tragic accident, the kind of reckless mistake a teenager could make without realizing the cost. But the prosecution had one advantage: Vincent's own words, preserved online, waiting to be played back in the cold silence of a courtroom. The trial hadn't begun yet, but its weight was already heavy. Every motion filed, every hearing scheduled drew the families closer to the moment they had been waiting for. A moment when the laughter that once echoed through a gaming headset would instead echo in front of a jury, no longer entertainment but evidence of intent. And as that day drew near, one question lingered in the minds of everyone watching. Would justice finally silence the laughter that haunted two grieving families? Even as the court prepared for trial, life in the town felt different. The streets that once echoed with laughter and bike rides now carried a quiet heaviness. The loss of Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas had changed everything. At the high school they once attended, their lockers were covered in photos, flowers, and handwritten notes. Friends still gathered there, unable to believe that the girls they used to walk home with were gone. Teachers spoke of them often, of Maria's kindness, of Isabella's energy, of how inseparable they were. Their names became symbols of innocence lost too soon. For the families, the pain didn't fade with time. Every morning felt incomplete. Maria's mother often said the silence in her home was the hardest part. The empty chair, the untouched room, the memories frozen in place. Isabella's parents echoed the same heartbreak. They visited the crash site often, leaving flowers where the girls took their final ride together. The community, shaken and searching for meaning, began to change too. Parents started talking to their kids about online safety, about boundaries, about speaking up when something feels wrong. Schools invited counselors, hoping to guide students through the confusion and fear that followed. What had once seemed like a tragic accident now carried a deeper message. Signs of danger can't be ignored. Across town, vigils turned into movements. Local groups called for stricter laws protecting victims of harassment and stalking, no matter the age. Maria's and Isabella's friends created pages in their memory, filled with photos of happier days, smiling faces, birthday parties, beach trips, laughter that now lived only in pictures. Through the grief, the families found strength in each other. They attended hearings together, spoke at community gatherings, and vowed that their daughters' names would not fade into statistics. To them, justice wasn't only about one courtroom verdict, it was about change. And in that small town, their message began to spread. People started to recognize how easily a line can be crossed, from obsession to violence, from online harassment to real-world tragedy. The story of Maria and Isabella became a warning, one that parents, schools, and communities across the country began to listen to. Yet, behind every effort for change, the families still faced the same reality: their daughters weren't coming back. The laughter they missed would never return, and the memories they cherished now carried a shadow. But their determination gave their loss meaning. The crash had taken 2 lives, but it had also awakened an entire community to something deeper: the cost of ignoring early signs, the danger of silence, and the power of standing together against it. And though their story began with heartbreak, it would continue as a call for awareness, justice, and the hope that no family would ever have to endure the same pain again. Months of investigation led to one final moment: the trial. Cameras waited outside the courthouse as the families of Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas walked in together, side by side, holding photos of their daughters. The air was heavy, the kind that made every breath feel slower. This was it. The day they had been waiting for, and the one they feared most. Inside, the courtroom was silent as prosecutors began their case. They didn't start with the crash. They started with the story behind it: the prank calls, the videos, the laughter, the stalking, the rejection that turned into fixation. Each piece of evidence told the same story: this was not a mistake. It was a plan. The jury watched as video clips played. Vincent's voice filled the room, his laughter echoing through the speakers. Every sound, every word, every mocking tone made the families tighten their grip on each other's hands. To them, it was no longer just evidence. It was the sound of what had taken their daughters away. The defense tried to argue that it was all an accident, that Vincent never meant for anyone to get hurt. But the digital trail told a different truth. His actions, his posts, his pranks, they built a pattern that no one could deny. It showed intent, anger, and a complete disregard for the life of another human being. As the trial went on, witnesses described the night of the crash, the speed, the aftermath. Investigators recounted finding the e-bike shattered across the road. Experts testified that the impact could only have come from deliberate acceleration. Every detail pushed the story closer to its end. And when the verdict finally came, the courtroom froze. The judge's voice broke the silence: guilty of first-degree murder. Gasps filled the room. Some cried, some sat motionless, and others whispered prayers of thanks. Maria's and Isabella's families held each other close, tears flowing freely, not out of victory but relief. After months of pain, the truth had finally been recognized. Vincent sat quietly as the sentence was read. No smirk, no words, no laughter. The same teenager who once mocked, joked, and taunted now faced the reality of his choices. The courtroom that once echoed with his voice now only heard the quiet sobs of two grieving families finding a small measure of peace. Outside, reporters waited. The families spoke softly. They said no sentence could bring back what they lost, but justice mattered. They thanked the investigators, the community, and everyone who refused to let the girls be forgotten. Maria and Isabella's story didn't end in that courtroom. Their names continued to echo through vigils, through new laws being proposed, through every parent who reminded their child to speak up when something felt wrong. In the end, this case wasn't just about one act of violence. It was about the warning signs ignored, the lives changed, and the courage of families who refused to stay silent. And as the courtroom doors closed for the last time, one truth remained clear. Justice doesn't erase pain, but it reminds the world that even in tragedy, truth can still be found. So tonight, as the lights dim and the story ends, two names will never fade: Maria Tiz and Isabella Salas. Forever remembered, forever loved, and forever symbols of strength, awareness, and justice. This is a story of Maria and Isabella, two young lives gone too soon, but never forgotten. Their story reminds us how small actions can signal something bigger, and how speaking up can save lives. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue bringing you real stories that matter, stories of truth, justice, and awareness. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, behind every headline, there's a story that deserves to be told.